Turn north as we head to Alaska. We turn to the environment. Scientists from the World Wildlife Fund have warned polar bears and other rare species could become extinct because of the rapid melting of the Arctic sea ice. They say that less ice is predicted in the Arctic this year than in any other. Now the Republican vice presidential candidate, Alaskan Governor Sarah Palin, has tried to sue the U.S. government over the listing of polar bears as a threatened species. She's also denied that global warming is caused by human activity. But in an interview last week with ABC's Charlie Gibson, the governor seemed to display a change of heart.
Do you still believe that global warming is not man-made?
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change. Regardless of that, John McCain and I agree that we got to do something about it, and we have to make sure that we're doing all we can to cut down on pollution.
But it's a critical point as to whether or not this is man-made. He says it is. You have said in the past it's not.
The debate on that even really has evolved into, okay, here's where we are now. Scientists do show us that there are changes in climate. Things are getting warmer. Now, what do we do about it?
Yes, but isn't it critical as to whether or not it's man-made? Because what you do about it depends on whether it's man-made.
That's why I'm attributing some of man's activities to potentially causing some of the changes in the climate right now. So,
but color me a cynic, but I hear a little bit of change in your policy there when you say, yes, now you're beginning to say it is man-made. Sounds to me like you're adapting your position to Senator McCain's.
I think you are a cynic, because show me where I've ever said that there's absolute proof that nothing that man has ever conducted or engaged in has had any effect or no effect on climate change. I have not said that. I have said that my belief is there is a cyclical nature of our planet, warming trends, cooling trends.
That's false. According to a Fairbanks, Alaska newspaper, less than a year ago, Palin did disagree, saying, quote, "I'm not an Al Gore doom and gloom environmentalist blaming the changes in our climate on human activity."
An excerpt of ABC's interview with Governor Sarah Palin. Well, Rick Steiner is with us now. He's a marine conservation specialist professor at the University of Alaska, has tried to uncover the scientific basis for Palin's opposition to any new federal protections for polar bears under the Endangered Species Act. When he requested the assessment of state scientists of Alaska who'd examine the impact of global warming on polar bears, he was told he might have to pay close to $500,000 for the request to be processed. Professor Steiner finally obtained the documents through a federal records request and found the state's marine mammal scientists were actually at odds with Palin's position. They'd agreed with federal researchers' conclusions that polar bears are threatened with extinction because of a shrinking ice cap. Professor Rick Steiner joins us now from Anchorage, Alaska. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thanks very much, Amy. Good morning.
It's good to have you with us. Professor Steiner, talk about what happened. Talk about Governor Palin's position, what she put forward, why she sued Alaska, why she sued the government, and where you came into the story.
I'd be delighted to. First of all, a little context. Alaska, big business here is producing hydrocarbons. And so Alaska's in the business of producing carbon that ultimately winds up into the global atmosphere. So there's this inherent political tension between the big business in Alaska, oil and gas, and the notion that carbon emissions are causing climate change that's ground zero impacts right here in Alaska. So there's that. Anybody who runs for office in Alaska has to embrace totally the oil and gas business in order to have a chance of getting elected. That's sort of the politic here. When Governor Palin was running for the governor's mansion, she supported more oil and gas development and never mentioned a thing about the threat of climate change here in Alaska. What I wanted, as soon as she took office, is when Dirk Kempthorne, the Secretary of the Interior, announced that indeed polar bears were in danger. They were proposing to list them under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. Immediately after that, Governor Palin, this is in December of '06 or January of '07, called him and opposed the listing before they'd ever looked at the science. Subsequent to that, the state's marine mammal experts, and there's only 3 or 4 of them on the state payroll, looked at the federal proposed rule to list polar bears, sent a nice long memo that basically concluded that, yes, the federal science behind the listing, documenting that polar bears are indeed threatened, was solid science, and they agreed with it. Later in the year, the USGS, which does most of the research on polar bears, United States Geological Survey, put out 9 studies. This was in September of '07. And again, the state's marine mammal scientists were asked to comment, to review that science, comment on it. They did, and they found that the conclusions were solid. That was the scientific work that predicted that 2/3 of the world's polar bears would be gone by mid-century, and all of the polar bears off of Alaska would be gone. And then they had a caveat about that, saying they thought that was a conservative estimate and that it would probably happen faster than that. So here you have the state's marine mammal experts, 3 or 4 of them, very reputable scientists, agreeing with the federal proposed rule to list polar bears and with the USGS studies showing that polar bears are in serious trouble, yet the governor maintaining her political position that polar bears are not threatened by anything and they're opposing the listing. So what you had essentially was a situation where the governor made a political decision, not a scientific-based one, to oppose the listing. Secondly, she misrepresented the basis of her decision to the public, saying it was based on science when indeed it really wasn't. And then thirdly, tried to conceal all of that when I was simply asking for that scientific review to be released. So there's 3 red flags there for the public.
So you try to get the information. What is it exactly you were requesting from Alaska, from the state government?
Sure. The state, as many states do, has sort of an analog to the federal Freedom of Information Act. Here it's called the Alaska Public Records Act. And under that act, citizens are entitled to information on what their government is up to, which is a fundamental tenet of democratic governance, certainly. So the governor had written an op-ed in the New York Times a year or so ago saying that she made her decision to oppose polar bear listing based on a comprehensive review of the science. And so I simply wanted that. You know, I found it very implausible that the scientists that I knew involved in marine mammal science in Alaska would have actually opposed the federal science behind the listing, because there is an overwhelming body of scientific thought and consensus that we're in a very warming situation in Alaska. It's caused by carbon emissions. Arctic sea ice is reducing catastrophically, and that is the habitat for polar bears, and therefore polar bears are in serious trouble. So that's what I wanted. I started the requests in December of '07, and it took about, the first response I got from the Commissioner of Fish and Game was, well, you know, it'll cost you $468,000 for us to process this response. And so I sequentially narrowed the request, and it got down to $8,000, $7,000. But still, I should have deserved a fee waiver as a faculty member with the State University in Alaska, requesting this information on what our government is contending.
You were asking for emails.
To get it to the public. I was asking for any documents, emails. I was specifically wanting the review by the state marine mammal experts of the federal proposed rule to list
So you finally
polar
get
bears
it
under
under the
Endangered
federal
Species Act.
Freedom of Information Act.
Well, that's right. It took me 6 months to get to know from the state of Alaska, from the Palin administration. They ultimately got an attorney general's opinion that they would not release this one document that I wanted, which was the state science review, claiming that it was a deliberative pre-decisional document and they had executive privilege to do so. So then they said I could take them to court if I wanted to. I found another way. I sent a FOIA request to the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, that I suspected probably had it. They did. I got it, and you have it now. And it's very clear from that and another email that they accidentally released to me, the state, that the marine mammal scientists agreed completely with the conclusions and the methodologies and the thinking process behind all of the body of federal science that was used to argue for the threatened listing.
How unusual is this level of secrecy, your attempts to get at a basic scientific document or a recommendation from state scientists on whether polar bears are endangered? I mean, she used this supposed report that no one could see to actually sue the federal government to keep polar bears off the endangered species list.
Well, the lawsuit is kind of perplexing at this point, because what you have here is the experts for the plaintiff, which would the state of Alaska, agreeing with the experts for the defendant, the U.S. government, that, yeah, the science says that polar bears are in serious trouble and that something should be done to afford them additional protection. So, many people here recommended that the state not pursue the lawsuit simply because it didn't make much sense. And also, the lawsuit puts the state of Alaska, and particularly the